So in this first chapter, I'm going to share with you my top 11 tips that help me get the digital Hydrasynth sounding less cold and digital and more analog and warm. Think of an old analog synthesizer that is in desperate need of servicing. That is the vibe we're going for in a good way. So let's get started. I'm going to start with an empty patch on the Hydrasynth, and I'm just going to quickly show you this chord sequence that I've got running from Ableton Live. So the first one that we're going to look at is in the voice mode, we have the analog flavor. So this basically does what it says on the tin, which is add analog flavor to a patch. And it does that by slowly and randomly modulating the oscillator tunings, the filter cutoff position, just to mimic that of analog hardware and the unstableness that comes with analog hardware. So if we go all the way to 127, it's kind of turning the Hydrasynth into an old, dusty polysynth that is in desperate need of repair, which can sound pretty cool. And when I'm building patches, that is something that I love to do, to add a lot of that analog flavor in. So let's play the chord sequence and I'll start to dial in this analog flavor slowly. You can really hear the tuning changing there. And off, it's just a little bit more consistent, or a lot more consistent. You'll notice that if we hit one key as well, with this all the way up. I don't know if you can hear that, but this is kind of like movement of the pitch there. So yeah, what we're going to do is we're going to crank that all the way up, because I want to show you more extreme versions of making the synth analog. So we'll crank that all the way up. The next one is the random phase. So if we take a look at a sawtooth wave, so this is on Oscillator 1, you can see when we click on that, let's just bring it back on, you can see that it's got a starting point here. So this is the starting point of the waveform. It goes up and then down and up again. If we put on random phase, what it does is it behaves more like an analog synthesizer, where this start point changes all the time. It's on a constant cycle. So what I'm going to do is hit play and then just bring random phase on. The next one that we're going to add is warm mode. By adding warm mode, what we do is we change the Hydrasynth's tonal frequency curve to be more like that of a warm analog synthesizer. I believe they modeled the frequency curve on the Moog, and this will reduce the high end while also boosting the low end, taking down the harshness of digital and adding the warm tonal balance of analog. So by adding this, you can hear that it will sound more deep, like the bass will come up in the chord, and also the top end just gets kind of softened a little bit, so it's not as fizzy. So let's play it without it and then I'll pop it on. I'll put it on. You can hear it slightly, it sounds kind of like slightly louder as well. It definitely sounds thicker in the low end. And so they're the first three that we're going to look at on the voices. And then the next one that we want to look at is oscillator tuning. Now I know that the analog flavor slightly detunes the oscillators, but what we're going to do is we're going to add all three oscillators in. And before I start to manipulate the tuning, let's listen to those three oscillators together with the analog flavor, just to highlight what that is doing. So I'll turn it off to start with. And then on. So you can hear it gives more of a unison vibe, and I'm just going to bring the master volume down a little bit because it's quite loud, that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use the oscillator tunings to create more of a detune vibe, even though we've got quite a lot going on with the analog flavor, because I'm going for an extreme version of this. So what I'm going to do is take a look at the oscillators. And first of all, what I want to do is put the third oscillator down -24 and put the second oscillator down -12. Let's have a listen to that. I might change that slightly. Let's see what that sounds like. Yeah, maybe not. So I'll go -12 on the third one, and then let's put this into a fifth. So we'll go +7. Let's go for an octave, actually. I didn't really like the fifth there. So yeah, we've got -12, got a 0, and a +12. And then what we're going to do is we're going to detune these. So let's leave the bass one, so oscillator 3, let's leave that at -12, just to kind of maintain that solid tuning with the low end. And then with these two, what we'll do is we'll slightly detune them. Let's just hit one note. So it's just giving us that warm kind of analog feel because we're detuning the oscillators. They're not perfect. A lot of the old synthesizers, you had to do the tuning by using your ears, whether that was the master tuning or individual tunings on the oscillators. So by just kind of knocking these off a little bit, it gives us that analog feel. And now we're going to take that concept further. So we've got analog flavor slightly knocking the oscillators out of tune from one another. We've also manually knocked them out from one another as well, using the sense. And then the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to use 2 LFOs to randomly modulate the tuning of oscillator 1 and oscillator 2 to get even more of that analog flavor using the LFOs. So we're going to quite extreme settings here. So let's go to LFO 1 first, because we can always copy what we do in this one to LFO 2. So I'm going to go to the waveform, and I'm going to change that to, we can either go random, or what I like to do is I like to go to sample and hold and just bring up the smooth like that, because I always feel like random's a little bit more rapid. With this, I can dial it down a little bit slower. So let's go for, I mean, you can experiment. It doesn't really matter what you do with the rate, but let's just go for like that. And then what I'm going to do is press save and then hit LFO 1, copy it to LFO 2, slightly change the rate so they're both different from one another. And then I'm going to send LFO 1 to oscillator 1. I'm going to send LFO 2 to oscillator 2. In fact, I've just done that wrong, so let me just redo that. There we go. And then you can see we've got these pitches here. So what we're going to do is knock one of them slightly up and one of them slightly down, so they move away from each other. This might be a bit too extreme, so I might have to dial it in with finer adjustments. Let's have a listen. Really detuned, but what I'm going to do now is I'm going to knock them out in quite an extreme way so you can really hear what that's doing. Sounds absolutely awful. So you can hear it kind of drifting up and down like this. So what we're going to do is we're just going to do a very small amount for this. So I'm going to hit shift and dial in maybe 0.5, and let's just go to around the same, going down the other way as well. So let's have a listen to that now. So let's just save this onto this number here. And then what we're going to do is just flick this over so we can have a listen to the difference we've made so far. So if I go to 91, this is an empty patch. Like, the difference is huge, right? So a lot of people start patches like that and then just bring the cutoff down and use that as a patch. But it just really does make a massive difference to really take care in how you set the patch up before you start. So this is all to do with like tuning and just changing a few settings, and it sounds massive already. So the next thing that we're going to look at is the noise oscillator. So just by adding a little bit of noise, what we're doing is we're kind of bringing that analog flavor to the sound anyway. So if we just bring a little bit of this in. For me, it's kind of like you're adding tape hiss, or you're just adding a bit of noise floor. Maybe you've got like dodgy circuitry and dodgy cables. You know, it's adding some realism to the sound to make it less digital. So a little bit of noise, and then we'll also look at the filter model options as well. So just by default, I mean, having one of these filter types is adding an analog flavor anyway, because they're all based on analog filters. Normally I do go for the low pass, so the ladder filter, which is Moog, and I normally go for the fat options because then you don't lose the sub frequencies as much, because when you bring up the resonance, it starts to lower the frequencies. And I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself here, because I also went through this in the first part of these courses. So what I'm going to do for this one is I'm just going to change it to the MS-20. So this is based on the Korg MS-20. that's just another tip. Basically, use the analog filters. And then what I'm going to do is add a bit of filter drive. So just add in that drive in there. It's like we're driving the circuitry of the filter. So let's have a listen to this. Let's go for around 53. I don't want to go too crazy on that. And then the next one I want to look at is the random LFO to filter cutoff. So again, the analog flavor is slightly knocking the filter off every now and again. So it's unstable and it's moving around, but we're going to basically increase that a little bit more like we did with the oscillators. So let's copy LFO2 and stick it on LFO3. And again, just to kind of have it slightly running differently, we're going to knock it off. Maybe I'll go a bit faster on this one. And then we're going to send that to filter 1. And for this one, just a real small amount will do. So let's just add a little bit of that. In fact, what I'm going to do is put it down and then I'll bring it up and we can listen to how fast the speed is. So let's speed it up a bit more. There we go. Just a little bit. So it's just got that kind of natural, not natural, obviously, that's the wrong word to use, that kind of like unstable, broken analog vibe. Now, I know having a broken synthesizer doesn't mean it's analog, but I feel like that adds to it, the inconsistencies. That's why I'm showing you these things. It's very important to have inconsistencies in your patches if you just want it to sound more realistic and just, yeah, warm and analog. So we've got them going. We've done quite a lot so far. And the next one I want to look at is the filter envelope shaping. So that does contribute to the analog feel of a patch, because one of the big things I love about the Hydrasynth is that we're able to change the curves. Now, different analog synths have different circuitry for the envelopes. They use different chips. So basically, they have different curves, and you can manipulate the curves of the Hydrasynth. Again, I covered all this in the first part of this course series, but you can see there we can change the curve of the synths. And now if any of you use UHE Diva, you're probably familiar with the idea of swapping out the different envelopes, and they all come with different shapes. So this is the same thing, but we've got a lot of control here. So what I'm going to do is just put that back to where it was, and then I'm going to bring the filter down, hit play, and I want a little bit of filter envelope in there. Let's go for quite a long open and close. And then what I'm going to do is just change the curve. Let's go even longer. Again, change the attack curve as well. And I know that seems like it's not quite a tip to make something sound analog, but trust me, it really is. Changing the curves makes the synth behave more like an analog synth, because you've got that curve dialed in rather than it just being a straight kind of line going up or down. So yeah, that for me makes it more analog sounding as well. It's worth experimenting with different curves to see how they feel. And then the next one I want to look at, this is the last one actually, so random LFO to delay time. So this isn't necessarily how to make the basic sound of the synth analog, but it's how to make the delay behave more like a tape delay. So this was with one of the recent updates. They allowed you to send an LFO to the time, and I was so happy when they did that, because I love analog sounding delays. Like, I've just recently got the Moog Mooga Fugas, and they sound awesome because they got this kind of like movement going on. And also Ableton's Echo, you can modulate the time. Any analog tape delays, space echo, anything like that, you get this kind of nice movement going on. And again, that to me makes it sound analog, the inconsistency. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, dial in the time and also bring in a little bit of the wet as well. So the key to this is not to use BPM sync, because then if you modulate this, it's going to modulate like that. And I want to go in between. So I'm going to turn that off. You can use a website. There's a website called Whipping Post, and delay time calculator. If you go on there, you can put in the BPM of your track and find out the exact millisecond of 16ths and eighths and things like that. But what I'm going to do is just do it by using my ears. And again, that is adding to the analog vibe. If it's slightly out of time, then that adds to it, I think, because we're using our ears, and that's how you do it sometimes in the analog domain. So we've got pan delay. I'm going to bring this up and just have a listen. Usually between 50 and 60% is what I go for. And let's bring that feedback up as well. I'm just going to hit play and then just dial this in. So I think let's just go for around 250-ish. That sounded right to my ears. It's not a stabby sound anyway, so it doesn't really matter if this is off a little bit, just whatever sounds right. So what I'm going to do is take another random LFO. So let's just copy LFO 3 now, put that on 4. And I might slow this one down quite a lot. And the other thing with these LFOs as well is we've got them on trig sync at the moment. It doesn't really matter, but you could turn the trig sync off to allow them to just continue and do their own thing rather than resetting or changing. So on this one, again, turn it off, send it to the delay, and then with the time there, I'm just gonna bring it up quite a lot so you can hear what it's doing. So classic kind of like tape delay effect. What I'm gonna do is just bring it down quite a lot, actually, maybe like that. So you can hear it. That's about right, really, just that. I mean, we could go a little bit higher if we wanted more of a pronounced effect. So yeah, I'm going to go for 0.2. And let's have a listen to that. Let's go fully wet so you can hear it. Let's add a little bit more. Add a little bit of resonance as well, because with that filter moving, we can really hear that pop out if we... Yeah, let's go for that. So let's now do an A-B between saving this patch that we're working on and bringing up an empty patch again. And what I'm going to do to make it more fair is take the delay off once we come back, and then I'll put it back in again. But if we listen to this one, it's quite solid, not much movement going on. Then if we go to our patch that we've just made and turn the delay off. In fact, it'd be more fair if I brought this down a little bit. Added a little bit of that envelope in. Obviously, I'm just doing it quickly. Yeah, so it sounds okay, but it's just a little bit boring. Then if we go to this, turn that delay off. Bring that delay in. So it sounds awesome. It sounds awesome. We've just got all this kind of movement, and it's always changing all the time as well. Never gets boring. So those were my top tips for making the Hydrasynth sound much more analog and warm. And in the next chapter, we're going to take a look at all my tips for driving the Hydrasynth into its extremes and just adding more character to patches.